Hi guys, it's Mixing with Ethan here. Sorry for my low quality setup. We're all in quarantine at the moment, so yeah, we'll get around to that. Um, Today I wanted to talk about how to really understand compression. So let's say you're a producer or a mixing engineer and you're starting to understand what compression is. You've watched a few tutorial videos, you've researched on it, whatever it is, and you're starting to get your head around how compression works. So today's video is about how to get from that stage to the next level, to a stage where you really feel comfortable with compressors and you understand how they work and how amazing they can be. So first of all, we already know what compressors are. We understand a little bit of what they do, but do we really understand the benefits of compression? The main thing about compression is a lot of people think, oh, it makes things louder. And from researching into it, you will understand that it actually doesn't. What a compressor does is turn the loud things down. The loud elements that breach the threshold of a compressor get turned down. So therefore the signal becomes more consistent and that whole signal can be turned up. So therefore it's perceived as louder when it's actually been turned down. The main thing a compressor does, and it's so important to understand this, is it creates consistency. A really good example of this is if you think of an 808. So imagine a hip hop track or something like that, and it has an 808. And when you hit a certain note of the 808, a really low one, it normally is, you can hear the energy of that 808 just falls, and it sounds a lot quieter than all the other notes. This is just an example. It could be anything. Just an 808 is an example. So when it falls behind on that note, if you compress the 808 signal, then therefore it'll make each note more consistent. The louder notes will be turned down, and therefore they are closer in level to that quiet note, so they can all be turned up and it's more consistent. So this is done by gain reduction, or the reduction of the dynamics in the 808, and that makes it more consistent. So every 808 note that hits is at the same level. This is really important when mixing. This is how you sculpt the sounds and mold the dynamics to be able to have things in the forefront or behind and create that movement in the track while keeping consistency and getting that energy across. The next thing to understand is attack and release times of compressors. So the downfall of compression is if you are reducing dynamics too much, you can kill the energy of something, and you can also kill the transients. So if you have a snare, for example, it's a really nice snare, really nice crack to it, and you add some compression to that snare, you could totally ruin the transient and the punch of that snare if your attack time and release time isn't right. If your attack time is too quick, then you're going to kill that initial transient of the snare, and it's going to lose all its initial attack. But by having a slow attack time, you're going to let that transient through, and then the rest of the snare is going to get compressed, and it will actually sound more transient afterwards. It can actually bring out the transient if you know how to dial in your attack and release times right. And then, for example, if you had a hip hop vocal and it's a rapper like going really quickly, and you had a really slow compressor on it with a slow release time, it can actually ruin the flow of how the rapper is performing. So it's really important musically as well to dial in the compressors. This can really enhance a performance, and it can even enhance a groove, like a drum groove. If you dial in the compression right, it can really help the groove and feel of something. The next thing I want to talk about is something I love the absolute most about compressors, and that is tonal compression. So to talk about this more, let's jump into Ableton and I will demonstrate what I mean. Right, so we are now in Ableton. I have got a pure sine wave here, and that sine wave is playing, I think it's around 60 hertz. Let's have a look on here. Yeah, it's around 60 hertz, and that is just a pure sine wave. Nothing special about it. What I want to show you guys is different compressors can generate different tones and harmonics. So here's the first example. So the sine wave is going into, first, let's do an 1176. And let me get this window up. So this is with it off. And then if I turn it on, you can see the harmonics that are generated down here. Now, what's really interesting about this is those harmonics that are generated can bring out the saturation, like it's saturating the signal, the pure sine wave, and it's generating harmonics out of it. And each compressor, obviously, especially when you're using analog emulations of compressors, can have different tones to them because they generate different harmonics. And this is why it's so important to have the right compressor for the job. So let's go to the next example. The next one is, this is a VCA compressor. It's the Plug-in Alliance Vertigo. So a VCA compressor is known for being a little bit cleaner than a FET compressor. So if you can see, it's generating less harmonics, but it's still generating harmonics, but just less. So that's a different tone. Again, that would be a cleaner sounding tone than the 1176. And each of them will have their own place where they would work best. And then the next one is a LA2A emulation by Waves. And this one has a lot of harmonics. So this one is obviously LA2As, they have tubes on the outputs, and tubes generally add harmonics all the time, especially when they're driven hard, they can really add nice harmonics. So you can see this is adding a lot of harmonics here. But again, it's going to be a different tone, and it's all about understanding what tone is best. And then a final one, which I think is a really cool example. So if I get up this meter here, you can see on the output, it's just a pure sine wave. But if I turn on standard clip, which is a clipping plugin, which literally chops off the top of the waveform, you can see it turns into a square wave. It squares off at the top. And you can also see, if we look on ProQ here, the amount of harmonics that are generated. So this is why we love distortion, especially on 808s, things like that. When you add distortion mixed with compression, you can have a consistent signal that's full of harmonics. And this creates a huge open energy in the track that really drives it. So it's really important to understand that compressors aren't just making things louder, they're making things more consistent, and depending on the compressor you're using, they can make them have a different tone and energy to them from the harmonics that are generated. I know that got a bit complicated there for a second, but I hope you followed along. If you have any questions, get in the comments. Don't forget to check out my mindset series as well, and check out my email in the description. You can send me any questions you have. This has been Mixing with Ethan, and I'll see you around.